Hello and welcome back to my craft room. It's time for a slow stitching catch up today. I'm going to show you how I'm getting on with my scrappy string quilt. I am so enjoying this, and I think one of the nice things is that you can make it bigger or smaller, and you can keep it simple or you can get really carried away, which is kind of what I've started doing. Hence it's a couple of days longer than I thought it would be before I came back to show you how I'm getting on. So let's stop waffling and have a look at what I've got on the desk. So this was my all of my squares put together. I just ran more lines of I've been using these sulky threads, which are 12 weight, a bit weightier than your normal kind of machine stitching thread. So I've just stitched in long lines either side of the lines where the squares join, if that makes sense, all the way in that direction and all the way in that direction. And so that's what those stitches look like on the back. You can see what a mess some of my embroidery is starting to look like on the back, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Real embroiderers will probably have the shudders looking at that, but it don't matter to me. I've tried a few different ways then of starting to add decorative stitching, just experimenting, and this is what I've settled on. This is I love how this has turned out. If I do say so myself. So what I've done is add lots of lines of extra stitching over the top of what I'd already done, and I've carried some of the lines of stitching over into the next. So I'm concentrating on, that's my starting point, is the diamond, and I'm just starting to work different kinds of stitches in different weights of threads, and I'm carrying some of the lines over into the next diamond or over into the next diamond this way, and I'm carrying the lines of stitches over the points where these squares join, so you start to lose the gap between the squares. Because if you bend it up like that, you can kind of see where, because I just joined them just by stitching them straight flat onto this backing fabric. You could join your squares like this in the traditional way, if that makes sense, but that's not what I wanted to do. I like my messy ends, but I didn't want it doing like, so if you look here, I haven't done that yet. I didn't want it doing this when it bends. So I need my stitching, my decorative stitching, to go across and kind of meld everything together nicely. So this is this little area here is kind of finished. This little spot I probably will go back into it again, but I'm moving away from that now and into this square, and I started working on this one last night, this square, this diamond. So looking at some of the different stitches I've done, and I'll demonstrate a couple of them in a minute for anybody that needs that, but you can always skip over. I'm going to timestamp this video so you can skip over the bits you don't need to watch. This one's, I think it's called a feather stitch. I'll show that one in a minute. I love that stitch. It's really easy and quick to do, and I think it looks really pretty there. That's just a big chunky cross stitch. This is a line of just a running stitch that I've then whipped, which again I can show you in a minute. This is a chain stitch, and I've used different weights of threads. So I've got a lot of the normal stranded cotton like that, and I'm tending to use now, instead of just using 2 strands out of the 6, which is what I use for the main stitching of my little scrappy string squares, I'm using 3 or even 6 strands, just to give a difference in the weight of the stitch to make it look more interesting. And I've also got in there, you might have noticed, some heavier weight threads like that as well, a couple of different ones in there, and that just give a whole different kind of look to the stitch. Sometimes I'm using a thread that sort of coordinates with the, like an orange on orange there, and sometimes I'm deliberately using a contrast, like using those lighter colours on that dark there. Oh, and I've done some couching, that's the other thing. So there, this is one of the thicker threads that's been couched down. So basically all I'm doing is running stitch, chain stitch, couching, oh, and there's a bit of blanket stitch. This bit of blanket stitch was actually on the edge of the fabric already. It's a little snippet of fabric that had that on, but this is the blanket stitch that I've done. So yeah, running stitch, blanket stitch, chain stitch, couching, bit of that cross stitch, and the feather stitch. And then with some of them I've whipped them, so if you whip, basically you run another thread around the running stitch you've already done, or you can whip a chain stitch. Have I done that here anyway? You get a thicker, it makes like a almost corded effect. I also had a little go here. I didn't do it very tidily, but can you see that? It's this, I think they called it cording. I saw it in that Golden Hands magazine I was flipping through on here a couple of weeks ago. I haven't done a very tidy version of it. Theirs looked absolutely perfect, but I quite like that extra texture that it gives. And although you should, the thread underneath probably shouldn't show, you can see glimpses of the sort of golden yellow colour underneath. I quite like that it does. You can see here where I'm using different thicknesses of thread, and that's a contrast, more of a contrast there with that chunky cross stitch. I've used all 6 strands of a stranded cotton there. A little bit of messy couching, more chain stitch, the feather stitch. And I've done odd areas where I've got a bit of gappage. I've just done a sort of messy crossover like that, just an overstitch. That's my kind of style. That if that's too messy for you, then obviously you can change it to suit yourself. There's another example where I'm carrying this down from one diamond into the next to sort of pull them together. So I think all of what I'll do now going forward, now I've had a bit of an experiment, all of the cross pieces I will carry on through. I might even carry them across more than a couple of diamonds, just to help to start pulling everything together. I'm also going to pull in some of these. So these are some of the trims I've still got left. Some of these kinds of things I used actually in the making of the original squares. If you let me just pop back here, I haven't done this in a very organised fashion as usual. If you've just seen this video and you haven't seen the others, I'll leave a link to the Scrappy String Quilt playlist so you can see this right from the beginning. Basically we're just using the tiniest scraps of fabric and tiniest scraps of ribbon and things to create these little squares, and then put them together into a little quilt, or you could make it tiny, keep it small and just do a needle case or a little wrap for your journal or whatever. But I won't go on about it now, so I don't want the video to get ridiculously long, but I will link to the playlist, so I'd suggest go and check them out first and then pop back if this is the first one you've seen. So yeah, I've ended up with some of these trims left though, so I've kept those out, and then there are some little beady things that I've had hanging around for ages. So I might put some bits of these in, and I can couch those down in the same way that I would the thread if I feel I need a bit of extra texture or contrast somewhere, just to use these up. I've had them knocking around for so long. There's little bits like, I know that was on a tag on something I was given, and I just kept this because I thought it was lovely. Well, it's perfect to use here. The colours are just perfect, so that will get added on, couched on. Bits of trim like this. I thought this one would work quite well. Stretch it across a couple of them. Bits of rick rack. There's not much else I can do with that last little bit of that yarn, but actually it looked really pretty couched down. So I've kept some of those bits and pieces aside. A little bit of gold there if I feel like, oh, I've got gold here and gold there and I need a bit over here. There's no reason why I couldn't still add a bit on there. So I'm keeping those handy. I'd love to be able to work that last bit of that in, but I think it might be a bit much. Don't know, might happen, but we'll keep it all together. I've also got a bundle of this. So this was one of the little freebies I got when you back to face again. When you order from Bazaar, so I've been using these Bazaar scrap packs. You don't have to use them, use whatever you've got. But if you want an excuse to go and get a Bazaar scrap pack, this is a really good way to use it. But if you do order from Bazaar, there's a bit at the end at checkout where you can add a note to seller. Just put artyfartyannie treat in that little note to seller bit, and they'll put you an extra little something or other in your order. And this was one of the little extras that I got. You get all sorts. It might be a little hand-carved wooden stamp, a little pot of sequins, a ball of recycled yarn. I've had all sorts of things. And this was one of them. And I thought what I could do, I've used some pieces of this you can see there, where I've cut off a little bit, torn it into 2 or 3 strips, and then I've incorporated that into the squares. And it did occur to me that I could do a similar thing with this. I'd probably tear it in half lengthwise, because I think it's thicker than it would need to be, and I could couch this down and do something similar to what they've done here in this. So this was another piece that came in one of my Bazaar scrap packs, and you quite often get these, and obviously this is a traditional way of doing it. They've reused lots of old pieces here, and then they've patchworked them together onto this backing, and then they've couched down like a bundle of fibres, very, very fine threads. They've couched down in between the patches, and I did think I could do something like that using this. I'd have to tear it down a bit, or these, again, all of these bits came in the scrap packs. It's not just fabrics, you get a lot of silks and cottons, and you also get trims and things, and you get a lot of this kind of thing. So I could couch these down as well in a similar way to that. So I might have a go at that as well. I'll show couching again. I'll show couching in a minute. I'm going to demonstrate the basic stitches that I've used here, because you look at that and think, oh, it looks a bit, if you've not done any stitching before, that looks a bit complicated, but it's really not. All of the stitches are really simple, and if you've just started on your slow stitching journey and you're at the point where you want to try a few new stitches, this is a really good way to do it. Or just keep it simple. So if you don't want to do it that way and you want to keep it, so I did experiment with a couple of other ideas before I settled on this. So up here I was more concentrating on on the squares, still seeing them as squares. So I just did some like blanket stitch in between there, a chain stitch there, just a big kind of rough overstitch here using all 6 strands of the cotton, and I sort of quite like the look of that, but I really prefer it to more focus on the diamond shape, because it sort of accentuate the diamond shape. I tried out just to see what it would look like. That's more of a contrast. That's the feather stitch again, what I'm calling feather stitch. That's using a contrasting one. That's the same stitch using more of a toning, coordinating colour. This is a big chunky thread, and I've done a chain stitch there. I also tried out a bit of just, so you've got the stitches. These are the stitches that were on the original squares, which looked like this. And then you can see the almost sort of basting stitches, really tacking stitches, attaching all of the squares to my backing. And then I tried just running another line of the more decorative straight stitching down here, just in a different, so I could run I could go across the whole thing. If you really love just doing the straight stitching, just do that, because I love the look of it. I mean, this is a piece, again, came from a Bazaar pack. It's 2 thicknesses of silk just straight stitched together, and I think that is just beautiful, and it's just straight stitching done in contrasting threads. It's absolutely beautiful. So you don't have to do fancy stitching if you don't want to. I just did some of that just to give you an idea of what it might look like if you just did another straight stitch. You could even do another lot of straight stitching going in this direction as well, and do them in different colour threads, or do them all going in this direction, and then just run some feather stitch and straight stitch and blanket stitch and stuff between the squares. So it's really, it's up to you what kind of look you want. I don't know, I don't mind the look of that, but I think I much prefer this approach. So that's what I'm going to do. And if you want to do something like this, but you don't want to do all the stitching afterwards, and you want a neater look, you could just put them together, like I said, in the normal way, where you'd put all the little squares right sides together like that, stitch along here, open them out, add another one, do the same thing, make long strips, and then attach the strips together. I like this kind of look, but you could definitely make it less ramshackle if you wanted. But yeah, I think by the time I've done this, is going to become quite encrusted with stitches, to the point where you you can't really see the pattern of the fabric underneath, but it all adds to it, adds to the sort of depth of it. I'm really, this is what I had in my head when I first started this project, and it's so nice when that happens, when it comes out how you wanted it to. So it has been lovely to see so other people's takes on this project, and of course they're all going to come out really different because it depends on what fabrics you happen to have, what you're using up. I want to try another one with scraps of denim and old lace. I think that would look really lovely. You could definitely do it all in more neutral colours, and very much just go with the texture, the differences in texture, but all neutral tones. That could look lovely as well. I do tend towards the Larry though. So I thought I would just show. I'm going to use my frame. You definitely don't need a frame. I just thought I would just show you the basic stitches that I've used. I think what I'm going to do is use the frame, because really the frame helps me to show you on the camera more easily what I'm doing. I think I'm just going to put it on top of there, and I'll end up stitching it to this backing fabric, but it'll be a much easier way of showing you what I'm doing. Running stitch I don't need to show you. I'll do a chain stitch on here as well, and a blanket stitch. Okay, so for the chain stitch, I'm bringing let's do it along here next. I probably wouldn't do it right at the top of one of my other lines of stitching because I'm almost stitching to show. So I'm going to bring it up there, wherever I want my chain stitch to start. And then I'm going to make a loop in the direction I'm working. So I'd probably more likely work right to left usually, but you can do it in whichever way. It depends on whether you're left or right handed as well. But sometimes I do work it upwards or downwards too. So in this case I'm going to work upwards because that's the angle. Maybe I could, if I turn it like that, it would be more like I'd actually be doing in real life. Okay. So I brought my thread up. I've made a loop in the direction I'm heading towards. I'm putting the needle back in very, very close to where I came out, and then I'm bringing it up again, depending on how long I want the stitch to be. You try and make the stitch sizes even, and then I'm just pulling it through, making sure it comes out on top of that loop, so that as I pull it tight but not too tight, the thread catches that loop and anchors it. And then, I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, hopefully it makes sense when you look at it. If you want to see a proper embroiderer showing you how to do these stitches properly, check out Sarah Humphrey Embroidery or Feather Stitch House. I love them, they show it really clearly. So I'm making a loop again in the direction, sorry for the wobbles, my glasses keep hitting the ring light. I'm making a loop in the direction I'm heading. Now I'm going to go back in, not in the same hole that I came out of, but very, very close to it. Now this is where it's different. If I was holding this in my hand, doing it in my lap, I'd go in and back out again in one movement. This is where this isn't really showing you how I'd sew in real life. So in one movement I'd go in and back out again, and I'd try and make the stitch the same length as the last one. Come up on top of that loop and pull it through like that. So let's see if I can do it more like I would do it in real life. And these, you get so quick at this after you've done it for a while, so, and you don't kind of bother making a loop like that. I'm just really doing that to demonstrate how it works. You just, in practice, you just sort of hold this thread in the right direction. So I'm going in very close to where I came out, and then I would come out again in one movement. Make sure it's on top of the loop, pull it through like that, and you carry on doing that until you've gone as far as you want to. Let's do one more. I can't get my head over this, so I might not be doing this very evenly, but I'm sort of more looking at what I can see on the screen, but there we go. So that's chain stitch, and obviously it will look different depending on the thickness of thread that you use. And when I've come to the end, I'll just put my needle back in just the other side of the loop so that it anchors that loop down like that, and fasten it off on the back. Okay, so let's say I wanted to, let's find something we can couch down. So I've got this little bit of cord here. Say I wanted to couch that down. I'll trim off that end. I would just lay it down where I want it to end up. I'd start myself off with a knot on the back, and I'd come up to one side of the cord or ribbon or whatever I'm going to couch down, or strip of fabric, whatever it might be, and then I'd put my needle down again on the other side of it. Oh, I wish I could get my head over this. So I'm coming up on one side of the cord and go down on the other side. Really, really simple. Just sort of evenly space them. Come up one side, go down the other side. I hope you can see that. And you know, you can use a matching thread to do the couching. I think it looks nice with more of a contrast. You could use a thicker thread. This cording that they did, I think they called it cording in the Golden Hands thing. They ran a line of stitching along, and then they sort of wrapped the thread around the stitching, and that's I'll try that in a minute, see if I can. There's so many. I mean, you know, if you've got a whole repertoire of stitches, you can use them all on this project. But I thought I'll just pick sort of half a dozen straightforward stitches to do, so that it's not too bewildering. There, so you just carry on until that's gone as far as you want, and then you'd take the thread to the back and fasten it off. So let's just snip that there and do something else. So for the blanket stitch, I mean, I tend to work left to right or right to left. I don't think it really matters hugely, but let's go left to right with this one. I always get confused when I'm starting. Right, so say I want to blanket stitch along this edge. I'm going to bring my needle up. Whoops. I don't want to make it too big. You can make it quite big and chunky. It's also quite fun to do blanket stitch that sort of starts off small and then gets bigger and then comes in again. You know, once you get used to the stitches, you can play around with them, do what you like. So I've just come up a little way from my edge. And now I'm going to hold that thread up there, up towards the edge. And this is just to start off. I'm going in, and again, oops, if I was holding this in my lap, I'd go in and out again in one movement, but because it's on the frame, I can't really do that. So just this first time, I'm going in really close to where I first came out. And this is how I start off blanket stitch. There might be a better way you're supposed to do it. And then I'm coming up just beyond the edge. And I'm making sure that the needle goes through the loop like that, so that when I pull it through, it catches that loop. So it's almost like I've made one of those little chains to start me off. Now I'm going to take the thread off in the direction that I'm going to work, and I'm going to go just along a little bit. You could do these really close together, but generally you do it sort of like I've done one there. That's kind of what I'm aiming at. So I'm going to go in here. Oh, I'm having to watch the camera instead of what I'm actually looking at now. Again, I'd do this in one movement. I'd go in and out in one movement, and I'm coming up just beyond the edge again there, and making sure it goes through the loop, so when I pull it through, it catches like that. So again, moving, I should be trying to get these evenly spaced, and it's really hard because I can't actually see. Let's just turn that a little bit. can't actually see what I'm doing. So you can make these as far apart or close together as you want, depends on what look you're going for. I'm keeping that loop going off in the direction I'm working in, basically. Oops, coming up just beyond the edge again, through the loop, down like that. Hopefully what I'm doing makes more sense than what I'm saying. So these people like Sarah Humphrey, and I forgot what the lady's name is on Featherstitch House, they're so good. They make it look so easy demonstrating these stitches and explaining what they're doing. Yeah, so that's my blanket. Ooh, that's my blanket stitch. So to finish off, I would just make sure I'm just going just ahead of that last little loop to make sure I anchor it, and then going down there and fasten it off at the back. If you have to start a new thread with blanket stitch, and I would say start with a knot on the back again and come up just inside that last loop you've made, like that. Bring up the new thread, carry on. So yeah, if you had this in your lap, you wouldn't go down and then back up in 2 separate movements. You'd go there and you'd pull it up again. You'd put it up again, up through again in one movement. It's just impossible to do on the hoop. So the hoop makes it easier to show you on camera, but it's not really showing you how I would do this in real life. There we go. So let's take that to the back again. Okay, I'm going to show you the whip stitch with a contrasting thread in a minute. So this, I'm just going to show you, I'm going to try to show you something like the effect of this cording that they did in the Golden Hands magazine. I can't be bothered getting it out right now to find out how they actually did it, but so you've got your line of stitching, and that's a really crooked line of stitching. So, and then you go back along your own. You could do this in a contrast. Wrap the thread around the stitches. So it might be easier to do this with the blunt end of the needle, because it's not going to want to go into the fabric then. I'm going in the same direction every time, and I'm just going to keep wrapping all of the stitches that I've already made. It is definitely easier using the blunt end of the needle. Wrap it round. Oops. Of course then the sharp end is on your finger, but hey ho. And I'm just going to wrap it round as many times as I can. And this is quite fine. So this is only 2 strands of stranded cotton that I'm using. If you did it with a thicker thread, you'd get a different result. But you can see it's a bit messy because my initial stitches were messy, but you get this kind of corded effect, which is a different texture again that I quite like. I like these. They're called chenille needles. You've been using that a lot. I've bent it, look. But because they've got a sharp point, but they've got a big eye, which is really helpful when you're doing this kind of thing. Okay, so I've got this thicker thread now. Little tip: if you don't know how to do this, this is really handy to do. Like, I think they call it a quilter's knot. You just hold the length of the thread against the sort of shaft of the needle, hold them together, wrap that round a couple of times, hold that sort of reasonably firmly, but obviously loosely enough to be able to do this, and pull the needle through. And as you pull the needle through, it creates a little knot like that, which is quite handy. So this time, let's say I wanted to make, let's do a bit of a whipped stitch along here. That angle sort of works for me. Hopefully that works for you as well, because then I can see what I'm doing, but hopefully you can also see what I'm doing. This is why I don't usually do close-ups of, I don't usually do kind of stitch tutorials and things, or I don't show I do a lot of miniatures as well, but it's really hard to film with my current setup, so I just don't usually bother. But I thought these are simple enough, surely I can manage to show you these stitches. So I've just done myself a little line of running stitch there. which I'm going to whip in a minute with a different colour stitch. But first of all, I thought I'd just show you this too, which is another thing you can do. So say I just want it, I could make that longer as well. Now I could then couch that down like I did here, or this is another thing I like to do. So this is like this is combining a couple of different stitches really. So I'm going to bring my thread up again near the beginning, and then I'm going to do the same thing as the blanket stitch, but I'm going to do that around this thread. So this time I'm working my blanket stitch in the other direction. I find I can work it in either direction. Depends on what suits me at the time. So I'm just now doing it without even explaining what I'm doing. Hang on. So this time I'm working in this direction, so I'm bringing my loop of thread this way, and I'm just going to work the blanket stitch just around. I'm not going into the fabric now, I'm just going to work it around the thread there. So I'm just putting my needle under that thread, bringing it up over the loop, so just like with the blanket stitch. And catching the loop like that, bringing the loop this way, the direction I'm working, putting the needle just underneath just the thread, not going into the fabric at all, and bringing it up over the top of that loop, and just pulling that knot up like that. So just make it, it's like macrame knotting, if you've ever done that. It's the same kind of thing. So I've got my loop coming this way, put the needle underneath, bringing it up through the loop. So I don't know what it's called, but to me essentially what I'm doing is working a blanket stitch around a thread instead of working it into the fabric. And it's quite a nice chunky sort of extra bit of texture, so I might work some of that in to my quilt as well. It's also quite a nice way, if I just keep going a minute, it's quite a nice way of making a loop. Actually, if you need a little loop closure to put a button through, you'd need to make it a little bit longer than this, but it makes quite a nice neat little loop. You can also work it, I think they call it a Picot stitch when you do that. You work little loops like this along the edge of something, and it creates this little sort of almost like a little scallop effect. So that's quite fun to try as well. And if you've done the blanket stitch, you've done it. Really, it's the same thing. As I say, it's just working it into the around the thread rather than into the fabric as such. I'm just going to go right to the end, and then I would just go back in there to fasten it off at the back, and it will look the same both sides as well. So while I've got this last bit of thread on my needle, I'm going to show you how you would whip the chain stitch. So I'm coming up at the beginning of the stitch, and I'm just whipping it in the same way as I did with the running stitch. So I'm just going through with the back end of the needle, so it doesn't catch. I'm going from right to left, right to left, right to left. I could do it the other way, but you just got to make sure you do it the same way each time. I'm just going through each stitch once. And you can do it with the same colour thread or a contrast, and you just get, in this case you get that little sort of twisted effect. Sometimes I'll go back up through, and in the opposite direction it looks almost plaited, so come up again, and this time I'm going to go, instead of going right to left, I'm going to go left to right with my looping through. So it's like I say, once you've got these sort of straightforward stitches under your belt, you can start playing around with them and getting different effects, you know. There you go. So that gives me a little sort of like twisted cord kind of effect. Okay, I'm going to do that feather stitch again. I think this time I've got I've got all 6 strands of a stranded cotton, and I've got this green, so it'll show up well for you. I'm going to start off of here and just go straight across there, I think. So this is it's what I'm calling feather stitch. I hope I got the right name for it. Like I say, you know, there are lots of proper embroiderers who will show you how to do all this stuff properly. So I'm just coming up where I want my line to start, and I'm going to aim for the same sort of length stitch all the way down. So I've got about 1/2 centimetre there, probably, something like that. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. It's whatever you want to do, but just try and keep it a little bit consistent with this one, I guess. So I've come up there, I've gone down there, and now I'm coming up again on the left hand side, level with the top of with where I first came out. And I'm going back down on the right hand side at the same level. But I'm not pulling it all the way through, I'm leaving a loop here. And I'm coming up again at the bottom of that first bit of the stitch, making sure I come out on top of the loop and pulling it through. So I get, and that's the first bit of my feather. And now I'm making that straight stitch again, aiming for about the same length. Pull that all the way through, and again coming up on the left hand side, I'm trying to keep it level with that, and I'm keeping it level with the beginning of this last straight stitch that I made, downward stitch. Coming up, back down on the right hand side, again level with this one, and about the same about level with that one. Once you get used to it, then you can experiment, you know, make some of them, this bit can be longer, or this bit can be longer. I think some of them can go out to there, and some can be quite small, you know. It's a really nice way of doing kind of foliage and things as well. I'm coming up there, over the top of the loop, pull it through so it catches that little V shape. And whatever this stitch is called, and whether I'm doing it rightly or wrongly, I really like the look of it, and it's a nice way to join 2 pieces together. I could have done it down there and shown that, actually. I like when you get the accidental, like this is a little bit of the decorative bit on the scrap of fabric I was using, so I don't want to cover that up anyway. So I'll do one more. And what I'm doing in practice on my quilt is going into the next square to sort of meld them all together. And now I'm going to do this bit with the back end of my needle, so I don't, because if you do it with the sharp point, it will tend to go into the fabric. If you use the back end of the needle, it won't, it will go under the stitch nicely. So I'm just going under the stitch like that in the same direction every time, so I'm going right to left, right to left, right to left. You can do it the other way, but just needs to be consistent. You know, so that just gives me a slightly different, and again it's lovely for doing a foliage kind of effect. I could carry on and whip up here. What would that look like? Never done that before. Yeah, I quite like that. So it's nice once you get to the stage of feeling comfortable with these sort of basic stitches. It's amazing how many different effects you can get with them. Yeah, so is that all of the stitches I've used there? I think it is. So we got blanket stitch, couching, using the blanket stitch over the thread rather than the fabric to create a little loop or a picot edge. What I'm calling feather stitch, the whipped chain stitch. I can't see any of the actual chain stitch now, but the chain stitch is under there, and then I whipped it with a different colour, and the whipped running stitch. Yeah, and I think all those are enough to give you quite a good variety of different stitches to use on the quilt. Or, as I say, if you just if you're just really enjoying a straight stitching, just carry on with that, because I just think just the straight stitching looks really beautiful. So I hope that will give you enough to move on to your, you know, if you're stitching along with me, it gives you enough ideas for how you could use decorative stitching to enhance your little squares. I can't wait to see what everyone else does. Excuse me, that took me by surprise. I still might go in, oh, there's one more thing to show you. I still might go in and add some little sequins and beads, because I've got lots of those that came in bizarre packs as well. But I think I just want to do the stitching bit next, and then I'll think, do I want to still add some beads and sequins and stuff here and there. The other thing I was just going to show you, which I've lost now. I'll just go back to the desk one more time. While I was digging out stuff for a little crafty session with a friend yesterday, I came across these little buttons, and I thought, oh, what perfect colours to go with my quilt. So I think I'm going to, you can see I've used one there, I think I'm going to be using one of these buttons at the centres of each of the diamonds. I don't want to overdo them. I think at the centres of the diamonds would be really nice, just to give little focal points. So I'm going to be using those. I think that just the colours are too perfect. It's just, yeah, it was meant to be. That was okay. So that's me done for today. Don't forget to be saving all your little orts, your little offcuts of threads and scraps of fabric that are really too tiny to use for anything else, because I've got I'm going to be doing some boho danglers soon, and I have a slow stitched project coming up, and I've got a couple of no-sew projects as well for people who love these kind of fabrics and things but don't like to stitch. So a couple more of them coming up as well. So keep hold of those. We're not going to throw anything away. I hope you're enjoying stitching along with me. I'll leave the link to the playlist for this project in case you're just coming across this video for the first time and you want to join us. It's never too late. It's called slow stitching for a reason. Do it in your own time. Enjoy the process. That's what it's all about. And I will also leave my link tree in the description box so that you can find your way to our Discord community and the Artyfartyannie group on Facebook, where we all get together, support each other, share ideas, and show off all our creations. And I love to see what everybody's been up to, so do join us. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I'll see you again really soon.